This is Hindol Sengupta. We're, of course, on Global Order. We've been talking so much about Bangladesh and Bengal for a long time that I have had the opportunity to speak about it on many platforms. But I wanted to have a conversation on Global Order with somebody who, like me, grew up in Kolkata, who knows the lay of the land very, very well, and somebody who also thinks very deeply about what does it mean to be Bengali in the world? What does it mean to be from Kolkata? What does it mean to be thinking about Bangladesh and Kolkata, Epar Bangla, Opar Bangla, as they say, and the fate of this entire, the East, so to speak, in India. Vikramjit Banerjee, very old friend of mine, very, very erudite voice, senior advocate, um, eminent lawyer. But apart from his role as a influential lawyer, Bikramjit spends a lot of time thinking about what it means to be Bengali and the fate of Bengal. Bikramjit, welcome.
Thank you.
I want to
Uh,
begin by talking to you a little bit about going back to when people like you and me were growing up in Kolkata. And those were the CPM days of Kolkata, the communist ruled Bengal. In your opinion, when you look at Bangladesh and Kolkata, Bengal, and Indian Bengal today, Bikramjit, what has changed and what hasn't changed?
um, if we when we grew up in West Bengal during those times, um, you could blame the left for a lot of things. There was no development at all, and that is when the decline of Kolkata started. Clearly, officially, there were no industries. Everything was shutting down. People over a period of 10 years, I saw it in front of me. What actually urban flight meant, because our entire localities got absolutely emptied. The young people left the city. Uh, but the CPIM, for whatever it's worth, always was very strict on law and order. It ensured that the law and order, at least in Kolkata, was maintained. What happened in the villages, what all of us knew, but it never affected the city of Kolkata so much, because the CPIM were very clear that Kolkata should not be touched, was the slow demographic change with the CPIM sort of indulged in, I would say, so as to create a vote bank for themselves, which they could rely on consistently during elections. This process of accentuated attempt to change the demography of the state, which the CPIM thought, by creating a reliable vote bank, it would be beholden to them forever, was started that period of time. What has happened today is, with the coming of the TMC government, that has almost taken on a jet speed. And that has changed the character of not only urban areas of West Bengal, as we can see clearly, but it has now affected Kolkata also very deeply. Um, it is a process which is now beyond, as some would say, almost beyond control.
Have we become one of those, oft repeated cliches, Bikramjit? We have a lot of opinion about the world, and indeed, we've seen many parts of it. And yet, as far as our homeland is concerned, do we really understand it enough today? I mean, look at what's happening in Bangladesh. Every time I go to Kolkata, there is this revived enthusiasm for this Epar Bangla, Opar Bangla coming together kind of thing. But actually, Bangladesh is going down the drain, and Bengal is not much better. The illegal immigration is destroying parts of Bengal. The Hindus are getting really the short end of the stick, as it were, in Bangladesh. It's almost like a civil war is being set up in the entire zone, and yet, you know, somehow I wonder whether the broader, not just you and me, but the broader Bengali community even, thinks deeply about this.
This is almost a question which goes to the root of Bengali identity. Uh, you know, it goes to questions which the Bengalis do not want to ask themselves. Is what is the present root of the Bengali culture which we speak about? The present Bengali culture arose from a distinct time in history based around Kolkata, and it was based on cultural mores which were a mixture of, let me put it this way, in many ways came from the milieu from which it grew up, which was European in some ways, and was also, whether we like it or not, was quite deeply Hindu. And in many ways, it was also deeply relied on the Sanskrit and Sanskritic cultural Indic heritage, which it drew deeply from. Now, that is the Bengali culture which we speak about. Now, from that time, this Bengali culture was not evenly spread in Bengal, especially not in Eastern Bengal. And as a result, the affiliation, let me put it this way, to parts of Eastern Bengal, especially the peasants of Bengal who were largely Muslim, was very, very limited. And this is not a new thing. Everybody in Bengal knows it. For every Swadeshi movement that we are very proud of, there was a counter Swajan movement which arose in Eastern Bengal, especially among the Muslim peasantry at that point of time. These are all documented historical facts. So there was always this continuous resentment. And I think that, therefore, anyone who says that partition was just some people playing games or the British playing games did not reflect the actual fact. Because on ground in Eastern Bengal, which was largely dominated, came from an area which was largely dominated by Muslim peasantry, there was not only a huge resentment economically to the zamindars who were largely came from the elite Kolkata background, but it was culturally and I would say in religiously, because we today forget that the Krishak Praja Party actually merged into the Muslim League. And it wouldn't have been able to do that unless there was this clear affiliation. So at the time of partition in 47, we sort of assumed that this problem was largely over. But it was clearly not over, especially once the demographic change of West Bengal happened.
The other question, of course, which is interlinked to what you're saying, is this understanding of how far or how deep the fruits, as it were, of the Bengal Renaissance really reached. And as time goes by, as I look at Bengal, both Bangladesh and, of course, Indian Bengal, I come to the conclusion that it was perhaps more of an elite project than any of us assumed. Perhaps that was our mistake. What do you think?
I have no disagreements to that, and history has borne us out on that. In many ways, when we grew up, both of us grew up, we took our sort of the identity, the milieu that we grew up as sort of universal. But I'm sure as we grew up, we realized it wasn't even universal in West Bengal, let alone in Bangladesh, which was very, very different, which came from a very different milieu, and which had a very different cultural, I would go so far as to say a cultural heritage. The impact of, as Richard Eaton says in his book, the impact of conversion, especially in the eastern frontiers of Bengal, was much more deeper because of historical reasons than from the western part. And the western part historically has, which includes Kolkata at that point of time, was much more plugged into uh, mainland uh, Indian culture, as well as, for the want of a better word, old Indic culture. And you know the shorthand of what I'm saying. That's how it was, and that's historically how it's reflected. The eliteness, of course, if you look at the reference points of what the so-called Bengali history of the Bengali culture that we discussed, was on two places. One was Joydev on one side and Chorjapod on the other. Now, these are largely, as we grew up, one was from Orissa, one was from Mithilanchal. So these reference points are very different from the reference points which in Eastern Bengal, which were largely people like Shah Jalal, and the conversions which took place, and large-scale conversions which took place, which come from a very, very different milieu. So this issue is something which, obviously resulted in the two contrary currents which went under the Bongo Bongo Andolan, the partition of Bengal movement, whereby the Calcutta elite wanted a united Bengal. It was clearly the peasantry and people in Eastern Bengal who did not want that and who opposed that, and who, and actually succeeded in a period of 30 years to, or 40 years to replicate that partition once more, because they did not identify with elite culture. And they, in fact, consistently rebelled against it.
As you talk about this, I'm of course reminded, and perhaps that again goes to show the milieu that you and I both come from, which perhaps is sadly far more constrained than we had imagined as, children or school students and so on and so forth. But of course, Tagore hinted at this to a degree in Ghore Baire. This division between the so-called nationalistic Hindu upper class, right, and the sort of peasantry and the dynamics therein. Now, of course, Ghore Baire has a particular trajectory, but the hint of like friction was certainly there. Perhaps it was there in other literature too.
Yes, all of us know, everybody knew that. You read Bonkim's writings, you know that.
Yes.
You read Sharachchandra Chattopadhyay's writings, you know that. Right. Everybody knows that. That's the elephant in the room of the Bhadraloks in, for the want of a better word, in West Bengal. Everybody knows that it is what it is. But it's...
Which is why Bonkim has been, in a sense, wiped away. I mean, no one talks about Anandamot, for instance, in Kolkata anymore.
And Bonkim, even Sharachchandra Chattopadhyay, I think everybody knew that. Everybody knows that. You grow up in Kolkata, in Bengal, you know that. But that's the elephant in the room. It's almost, in some ways, it's impolite to talk about that. It's not, it's a matter of, as I say, it's a matter of aesthetics that you don't discuss this issue. It's not so much a fact that people don't realize, because I personally, both of us know, Calcutta is a very segregated city. Delhi is an unsegregated city. Calcutta is a segregated city in many, many ways. But it's aesthetically not proper to speak about it.
There are all these examples, of from the world of creative arts and this, that, and the other, which sort of bridge the gap. But those examples are perhaps just that. They are those standalone examples which don't prove the rule. The other question that a lot of Bangladeshis throw back when this is discussed, Vikramjit, is that, well, look, I mean, even up till Sheikh Hasina, the number of Durga Pujas across Dhaka was supposedly growing every year. And she gave whatever, some 500 rupees or whatever every year to all the puja pandals. And they showcase that as an example of, look, almost a different alternative is possible, could be possible. But yet that story collides deeply with the incessant demographic decline due to violence that the country has seen. It's almost dichotomous.
No, I think anybody who's, and irrespective of whatever people say, you and I, who've both been studying Bangladesh and the position of especially the Bengali Hindu community in Bangladesh, knows that during the time of, in certain parts, or let me, certain times, the oppression or objective oppression is less, but the push of oppression is consistent. People have consistently been pushed out of their places. People know that. That's why people have fled the state, fled the country. The only question was, all of us can see today that it was actually extremely skin deep. I think anybody who had an engagement at that point of time uh, would know that it was skin deep. And more interestingly, as there was, you could say, as there was this huge flight out of Bangladesh of the upper middle class, the constituency which sort of promoted these ideas became fewer and fewer and lesser. So, as most of the sort of milieu that we sort of discussed today, unlike in India, where a substantial amount has still stayed back, most of them actually left for the West, which left the constituency for these ideas became less and less. So, the increasing amount of pujo and all that was, today we realize, was skin deep, was actually done under state patronage, which does not mean that it affected the society in any fundamental manner. Of course, I'm sure there are good thinking people, and maybe those voices over a period of time will gather themselves, and maybe they will work for an alternative. Maybe it's actually tolerant. Maybe whatever I understand is possibly a very cynical understanding, especially and under the present circumstances and the present time. But it's a recurrent issue. It's happened too many times, and that's the only thing which I think about, because irrespective of anything, if you see the simple question, the population of the minorities in India have grown, statistically grown in the census, but both in Bangladesh and in Pakistan have declined. And in Bangladesh, we know that everybody who at any point of time who's a minority have left. And that's not only Hindus, that's like every religion, whether it be Buddhist, whether it be Christians, they've left. Now, a lot of them, we know of our experience of being in Kolkata, that they came to India at some point of time, 70s, 80s, even after that. And you speak to them and they know, and if they're polite enough, they'll discuss it with you. But that's where it is. So that's the truth, which again is the elephant in the room, which no one wants to speak about.
This is the interesting thing, right? I mean, essentially what you and I are saying, and especially what you're saying, is the average Bangladeshi, we always thought the average Bangladeshi Muslim looked something like Rezvana Chaudhuri Bonna, who sings beautifully Tagore's songs, Robindra Songit. However, we have come, at least in the last decade or so, come to perhaps the tragic realization that actually the average is more like Hepazat-e-Islam. If not the average, the constituency, the pressure groups are heavy and strong enough and spreading rapidly, so much so that there is a huge now spillover into the border areas of Bengal. Sometimes, and I have to say this, sometimes when I go to some parts of Kolkata, or sometimes when I hear conversations in Kolkata, I feel that it's almost like there is a Bangladeshization of the popular culture of Kolkata, which is very strange. It was not what it was when you and I were growing up there.
I don't want to say that, the entire Bangladesh has become something like the Hepajat. That I think most people are, I think, want to get on with their lives. They're largely tolerant. They are not people who would indulge in violence or indulge in imposition of any ideas on anyone. That's what I think about most people. But it does seem that ideas of the Hifazat have much more resonance than we thought it did, than we sitting in Kolkata thought it did. And it's clear that those ideas have consequences. And this is not a new idea. I think when we were there, we saw the shoots of it, with increasing support for, let me put it this way, Islamist organizations. And I'm not saying that um, with explicit sort of ideology to that extent. And today, I think the left of all people had an alliance with some of them running for election, which is completely unusual. The left of all things. And which goes to show actually what has happened. I think that is the biggest example which anyone can sort of come up with. Of course, with the Trinamool, one knows actually what has happened. That's apparent, that's all over, that's in your face. But the left had to come into an alliance with an explicit Islamist party, which would have been unthinkable, which would have been completely unthinkable in Bengal, when we grew up 30 years back, 20 years back.
Vikramjit, I mean, it opens up this thought. I'm so glad you mentioned this because I've been thinking about this. In fact, all the global conversation about the global hard left's ties and support to radical Islam, right, and Islamism. In fact, one of the petri dish case studies is perhaps the left in Bengal. This sort of coming together of the left with radical Islamists. One of the first examples would be, at least in our part of the world, would be perhaps Kolkata.
I don't know, but I think, I have a take on that. It's more driven by local compulsions, because at the end of the day, in spite of the rhetoric which one has to fight locally for local elections. And I think someone as strong as the left, which is so clearly anti-religious for that point, today have to align themselves with an explicit Islamist party. I am not saying radical Islam. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I'm saying an Islamist party which has clearly is based on Islamist ideology. There's no denial of that, no doubt about that. The left is in alliance for that, which just goes to show that that's what the compulsions on the ground is, because you're fighting an election. You would do that. So, I don't think it's a broader part of the global left, but that's a separate ideology. That's a separate discussion. But in West Bengal, I think this is absolutely ground level compulsion. And this ground level compulsion arises because of these vocal voices which have arisen. And we've seen it growing over a period of time. We've seen the change in our lifetime. So it's not something which is unusual, and it's been done obviously with political patronage across party line, both with the Trinamool as well as the left.
Most curious things that happened, Vikramjit, and I want to share this with you and get your opinion. When I began talking about this, a few months ago, and quite vociferously, I received a mail from one of a Bangladeshi academic who actually said to me what some of my Muslim friends, educated Muslim friends in Kolkata said, a deep sense of fear and anxiety that, in a sense, the more sort of liberal, educated, West-facing even Muslims in both countries, that they would probably be the next lot to face the brunt from the radicalism that they were seeing around them. And I want you to talk a little bit about this constituency, Vikramjit, because you knew such people in school.
I know them. I
Studied
still
with
know them.
us.
They're good friends of mine. And
Exactly.
I get along.
And mine too, from Kolkata. And many of them are worried. And I was interested to see that this professor from Bangladesh who wrote to me was expressing very similar fears.
No, but it's not about, it is like everywhere, as in, what happens when, uh, you know, and I'm not saying a Muslim party, I'm saying an Islamist party comes into power. And when an Islamist party comes into power, the first set of people, and I'm specifically, I'm distinguishing between both. Most of the time, historically, in Islamist party, the people who've suffered were largely minorities, wherever they are, and that's happened in Bangladesh. And as these forces grow and they multiply, there's a real danger that such a situation may arise even in West Bengal, because that's a backwash of what is happening. And we are seeing the ripples of it. We've always seen the ripples of it. Slowly, we saw it in 72, we saw it in so many other times, that the backwash, we think in Kolkata that we are completely protected, we are different, and the water will not rise above the storm breakers. But never happens. It has not happened historically, and it's not going to happen now. Case in point is what we see around in Murshidabad. I have very good friends there, very, very proper, liberal people. But on the ground, things are changing around them. I'm sure they also appreciate that. And they themselves would be forced to come to a fork in the road. And so these are questions which, obviously face us increasingly.
The thing, Vikramjit, that I wanted to talk to you about is, of course, the fate of Kolkata itself. Your hometown and mine, originally, place where we come from. Kolkata is in a very curious place today. It is supposedly the hub of Bengali culture and so on and so forth. And yet, there is this very sort of strangely delusional Toligans-led crowd, the Kagoj Amra Dekhabona, we will not show the papers kind of people. And then there's a lot of elderly people, because a lot of people, of course, have left Kolkata, and the young people have gone to work and study and so on and so forth. And sometimes when I talk to them, it's almost like they are in, undergoing a siege, so to speak. It's, they don't know what to do. If they speak out, there's a problem. If they don't, there's a problem. And they're really caught between a rock and a hard place.
And because the entire question is, where do they go? Because there are certain certitudes in life one is brought up with. And when those certitudes which you are brought up with changes, where do you see yourself? That's a question which, and I'm not saying, today I'm not even saying, both of us know it's not about the Tolerance Club, because the Tolerance Club has largely been a extremely cosmopolitan place which could shift to any club anywhere in India at the bat of an eyelid. So I think
they the Tolerance Club. I meant the people who work in the movies.
I'm just saying that, giving you an example. So I think that group of people would be the least affected.
Yes.
Because they'll get the next job to Bangalore, and that will be they're out of it. Or that winter will take the flight off to California, and that is the out of it. Right. We know them, so that's not going to be affected. But there are people in, and I know in that milieu, who are stuck there, who live there, who've always lived there. And they are facing this complete existential question as to who they are, what they stand for. Because a lot of these people are deeply liberal people. They're nationalist people, wonderful people, people who have a love for their country, people who have a love for their culture, and people who are liberal. That's a very unique sort of combination, which I think there are few people in South Delhi whom I met. I don't know, I haven't met many people in South Bombay, but I know the set of people. But it's actually, Kolkata had a decently large constituency, decent, hardworking, nationalist, people who loved their culture, and people who were liberal. But
Who
today,
were truly
both liberalism,
cosmopolitan, truly cosmopolitan. They had a real eagerness to learn about the world, even if they couldn't access some parts of it.
correct, correct. We knew the books which we grew up with. You look at
Yes, yes,
Satyajit Ray's books; they're based all over India. You look
yes.
at Professor Shunku; it's all over the world, different parts of the world, and all the time, in Kenya, in Europe, and things of that sort. So, there was always this: you have to be liberal. I think a wonderful, wonderful movie is Shaka Kushaka. If you've seen that,
Yes,
Utpal Datta
absolutely.
was the archetypal person who resembled,
Correct.
who brought in this sensitivity.
And perhaps based on Ray himself.
Yes, and this is this entire question of that dichotomy as to you were both nationalist and liberal, and today you're possibly going to come to a fork in the road where you have to choose between both, which I don't think they ever sort of thought that they would ever come to. Their parents never thought they would ever come to, but they are down that fork now. So it's very crucial of what is happening. In some ways, their choice is very limited because both of us know there's a huge demographic flight out of Kolkata. So exactly like what had happened in Bangladesh, the upper middle class have left and gone off to the west. In Kolkata, the upper middle class have left for all parts of India and different parts of the world. Both of us know it. Our families have seen it. So the people who are stuck there are in a very, very difficult position.
Wrapping up the conversation, this is really, I mean, this is more of an adda than anything else, but a very serious one on a very serious topic that really impacts both of us. Bikramjit, I want to wrap it up by talking to you a little bit about what does it mean for us and our Bengali identity. Because if you really think about it, Bikramjit, I mean, the Bengalis are becoming truly one of those imperiled groups in India. Our homeland is always in crisis. Our culture is considered now again in distress. There is all kinds of strange wokeness coming in. It just, I mean, we are in decline, but we're also in peril. And I wonder what that means for people like you and me.
Well, I have a pessimist take on it, and I have an optimist take on it. The pessimist take is it almost reminds, if anyone's read the history of the fall of the Roman Empire, you would
Yes.
think that it's in a similar situation of the Romans as to what it was happening and how the great elites of Rome, who once ruled the entire Europe and parts of Asia and parts of Africa, then their culture, their civilization, their wealth, everything disappeared in front of them. Uh, that is always at the back of my mind. But optimistically, I'm also thinking, I also see uh, that once you come to this fork in the road that we discussed, people are making their choices. And I also see at the bottom, uh, there is some sort of revival which is going on, which will be very different in its sensibilities than the people who were formerly from Kolkata. If you see the demographic even within the broader Bengali, Bhadralok, and Hindu community in Kolkata, you would see that rapidly the old people who were decided on cultural issues have gone and being replaced by very different kinds of people. Their sensibilities are different, and in some ways, the old people would consider these people crass, but they are both much more industrious, and I would say, uh, you know, they have made their choices in increasingly as to which fork in the road they are taking. So I think this proportion of people is increasingly going to grow. And of course, they will borrow a lot from the existing culture, but the sensibilities of the old culture of being hung up on an extremely liberal point of view, of hung up on an extremely of internationalist perspective of everything, is changing and changing rapidly. Both of us have seen it. These people are much more grounded, rooted, closer to the ground, and a reflection of ground reality. So we are the culture changes, and we are seeing a change in culture and sensibilities. And I think, for better or for worse, this will be the dominant culture of the future. And this international globalist sort of culture that we had, will, because of both of circumstances and because of the times that we live in, is imperiled, and I don't know what the future of that is.
Vikramjit, as always, a real pleasure talking to you. We should do this more often. Next time, maybe with some cha also. Thank you very much for your time. And it's a Sunday. I've taken up a lot of your time, but thank you very much. I will let you go back to enjoying your Sunday. But it was very important to talk about this because I think it's an issue that impacts us very deeply and we think a lot about it. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.